Amen.
Amen. All right. Proverbs chapter 31. I feel like Proverbs 31 is like the pinnacle of Proverbs. I believe that everything is pointing toward this point where we see in Proverbs that you see a mother speaking to a son, warning of certain things, but also setting a high standard for ladies of what they ought to desire in life. It's famously known for being the virtuous woman chapter. In fact, look at verse number 10. Proverbs 31 verse 10. Who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. He's saying the virtuous woman, the woman that has virtue or that sees the value in purity and righteousness is invaluable. There is no price you can set on a woman that loves God, that loves her family, that wants to serve. I mean, there is no price, there is no dollar amount, there is no value that can be set on this type of a lady. Now, the goal of this chapter here, I believe, is to help a man to find and to know what to look for in a wife, but it's also, I believe, for a young ladies to say, this is a goal that I ought to attain to. This is something for a married woman to look at and say, this is where I need to set goals in life and have my priorities and perspective in life. In fact, look at verse number 30 at the end here. Proverbs 31 verse 30, favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Now, what makes the virtuous woman virtuous? It's by her fear of the Lord. You notice this is what finishes off the chapter, is that a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. And I've heard many sermons on Proverbs 31, and I don't look back to those. I think the Lord has shown me something new in this chapter I want to share with you tonight. And it's really, what is the heart of a virtuous woman? How did she become a virtuous woman? You know, I myself have preached about the hands of a virtuous woman, what her hands does here. You can look at the household of a virtuous woman and what it ought to look like and how it's taken care of. But I really want to talk about the heart of a virtuous woman, and the heart of someone, or the mind of someone, can be seen or recognized, I believe, by their perspective, how they see things, but also their priorities. What they recognize in life is the most important. And you know, the fear of the Lord must come first, right away. A woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. So for any lady to say, well, you know what, maybe I'm not there, but I want to be there, well, that's a good start. You're afraid of the Lord. You recognize that He's right. You recognize that we can all do better instead of just puffing yourself up and saying, I'm good enough, or I've accomplished it. No, we all ought to be striving to do better. So your perspective and your priorities, this is what really makes a Christian, I believe, one that's following in the commandments of the Lord and is being a good disciple. It is, what is your perspective on life? How do you see things? And what is your priorities? What goals do you have? What do you want to make sure that you accomplish? We see this in this chapter. Look at verse number 18. Proverbs 31:18. She perceiveth. Perceive, that's what you see. That is what your eyes are looking at. She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. In other words, she is looking at things and checking on things and making sure that they're up to par. They're hitting the standard. There's a goal she sets, and she says, I need to make sure that everything hits that goal that has already been set. Look at verse number 27. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. She is looking at things and making sure, again, that it's up to a standard, that it is good. She's not being idle. She's not, well, I won't worry about that. I'll delegate it to the kids. Let somebody else deal with that. I'll hire a maid. No, she looketh well. She perceiveth. She feareth the Lord. So a virtuous woman is someone that sets goals according to the Bible, I believe, that sets priorities in her life, things that should, a desire to attain righteousness, and her perspective on life, how she sees things. If she's always depressed or always complaining or always murmuring, she's failed. Now, Proverbs, as we build up to this point, there are Proverbs that have warned us about the adulterous woman and the bitter woman and the complaining woman, and we know we ought not to be those, and we're not going to focus on those tonight. We're going to talk about, ladies, how can you be that virtuous woman? Well, set some goals, have some priorities in life, and your perspective, how you see things. And this really is the heart of a virtuous woman. You know, how you see yourself, how you see and perceive things yourself, and how you see the world, it will determine what you are able to accomplish in life. You know, there are people that are so pessimistic, it doesn't matter what you tell them, they're always going to be upset. They're always going to have a frown. They're always going to look for the negative in it. I heard a joke recently, and I may butcher the joke. I only heard it one time, but a guy that has a hunting friend that's the perpetual pessimist. He's always complaining. He always sees things negative. And he found a hunting dog that could actually walk on water. Like, this was a miracle dog. This dog could walk on water, and he said, man, this will really impress my friend. Like, this will show my friend, this might cheer him up. He'll see things, right? So he takes him out hunting, and all day this dog's just walking on water. He gets his paws wet and nothing else. But the guy never says anything. The pessimist never says anything. So finally they're riding home, and he says, well, did you notice anything unique about my dog? And he said, yeah, sure did. And he said, well, what did you notice that was different about him? He says, oh, well, I noticed that he couldn't swim. And it's like the dog's walking on water, and the pessimist wants to, well, he can't swim, you know. I mean, poor dog can't. I mean, think about it. How we see things in life will determine what we can accomplish. And if you're always negative, if you're always just worried, if you're always afraid, well, we can't go down there and do that. We can't go soul winning. They'll reject us. Oh, look at that house. They look like they're pretty ghetto. I better not knock on that door. They might hate me, right? Oh, I don't know if I should go to church. I might be too tired. I'd be sick afterwards or whatever. However you see things in life will determine what you can accomplish. And look, we can do all things through Christ, which strengthens us. So as a virtuous woman, you need to encourage yourself in the Lord. You need to lift up yourself and encourage yourself. You know what? I've got it made. I've got a great family. I've got a great husband. I'm blessed with health. Whatever it is, and look at the positive things in life. Again, the virtuous woman, we're looking at her heart. What is her perspective? What are her priorities in life? And I believe, Christians, I believe our priorities, our goals in life are very clear, and Christians are called to serve God first. Then comes your spouse and your children. That's second. Your family is number 2. And then the rest of the world, well, that's number 3. All right? And that's the order, is God, family, and everybody else. I want you to go to Ephesians chapter 5. Go to Ephesians chapter 5. I'm going to show you those priorities out of the Bible. And, even yourself. I believe that God comes first. Your husband comes second. Your family comes third. Yourself comes fourth. And then everybody else falls somewhere after that. And we have to have these priorities in order, even for a husband. As a husband, my priority comes to God first. My wife comes second. My children come third. And then I have to put myself behind my children. I cannot put my children before my wife. I cannot put myself before my children, because that's wrong according to God's standard. God's standard is, He comes first, your spouse comes next, your family and your children come next, and then everybody else. And that's the in-laws, that's your boss. That's the poor and needy. Everybody else comes after that. So as we look at the heart of the virtuous woman, we're going to see what she considers to be most important in life. What does she value? What is important to her? And that will help us to see what a virtuous woman looks like. So again, I told you, a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised, it said. I think it was in verse number 30. That's number 1. God comes first. Fear God first. That's an obvious. That should be a no-brainer if you're a Christian. But her family is second, and we're going to look in Ephesians chapter 5. Look at verse number 22. Ephesians 5. Verse number 22. Wives, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. This is such a strong statement, ladies. God is saying He has a perfect order. It's hard enough for every individual just to submit themselves to the Lord. And God says that we need to submit ourselves unto one another. We need to help each other, loving each other as brethren, the Bible teaches. So husbands have to lay down their life for their wife. Ladies, it's your job to submit yourself unto your husband, giving him the authority that God expects. God wants structure for a reason. So He says, submit yourselves unto your own husbands as unto the Lord. As you submit to your own husband as if you're submitting to God. And it's sad when you see a husband and a wife separated, and, if the woman can do anything to fix it, she ought to. Instead of complaining about her husband and saying, well, he doesn't meet my standard here, and, well, he doesn't, I think that he needs to go to church 3 times a week and he doesn't want to go. Well, you still need to submit yourself unto your husband. That's God's law. That's God's purpose. And whenever a woman says, well, I've given up on him, well, then she is in error. And the majority of divorces, I think it was Brother Ross was telling me, the majority of divorces is like 70% are filed by women. Yeah, 70% of divorces, it's initiated by the woman. The woman says, I give up, I'm done. 70% of marriages fail. Why? Because a woman won't submit herself under her husband. She's not willing to say, well, even if he's wrong, I'm still going to obey him as unto the Lord. Listen, if we can get a hold of that, then we can understand everything else can fall in place. And, too many times in a marriage, it's like one spouse says, well, until the other spouse does their job, I'm not doing my job. Well, it never works that way. You start doing your job and then pray to the Lord, and, Lord willing, eventually the other spouse will get with the program and begin to do their job. It takes two. You have to work together. Look at the next verse, verse 23. Because just as much as we preach to encourage the virtuous woman, we need to preach to the husband as well. Look at verse 23. For the husband is the head of the wife, even as Christ is the head of the church, and he is the Savior of the body. Now, this is God's law, and it's perfect. Ladies, this is beautiful for you. There are a lot of things you really don't want to have to take care of in life, and God will give you a husband to take care of that, but your job is to submit to that husband so that he can run the house, that he can be the head just as Christ is the head of the church. Verse 24, therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in everything. Just as this church is subject to the Word of God and what the Lord Jesus Christ teaches us, this is what we have to do. We will not do what contradicts with the Scripture. Right. Mind you, there are certain things that are open to a little bit of interpretation. God, where the Spirit of the Lord is, there is liberty. Amen. But He's also given us the law. And the things that are clear are going to be clearly taught and clearly obeyed in the church. As a church, we submit to what God has given us. And that's the way it ought to be in the household. The wife should submit to their own husband in everything. Verse 24. Therefore, as the church is subject unto Christ, so let the wives be to their own husbands in whatever feels right. In most things. In the convenient. In everything. Oh, no, that's no fun. This is why 70% of marriages end, because the woman says, well, you know what? I want it this way. I want to be in that neighborhood. I want a new car. I'm bored. I don't want to stay at home. I don't want to raise children. Can't we just let the state raise our children so they'll raise up and be little commies? And can't I go to work and wear pants and cut my hair short like a dyke? Can't I do all that stuff? Well, God's not going to bless that. God does not bless that. And the people that have that lifestyle are never happy. They are never satisfied. Why? Because they're not submitting in everything. Look at verse 25. Back to the husbands. Husbands, love your wives, even as Christ also loved the church and gave Himself for it. This is so important. This is so important. How do you get a virtuous woman? Well, you start by loving your wife. Husband, if you say, well, my wife's not a virtuous woman, I've got all these problems. Well, are you loving her like you're commanded to? Are you praising her when she does right like you're commanded to? Are you cheering her up like you ought to? Or do you just treat her like a doormat? Because if so, you're in sin. Right? So God's perfect balance works out when a husband actually loves his wife, when he cares for her, has a heart for her. Christ loved the church. He gave Himself for it. And men, if you want a virtuous woman, you must do your part. I've heard losers. I heard this one loser one time. Well, and a single guy who knows everything. He's going to tell you how the women ought to be, right? Single guy. Well, I'm just looking for one that, looks perfect, acts perfect, obeys everything I do, doesn't just let herself go and never bathe, and I expect her to be fit. I'm like, what, you want her to start doing push-ups instead of raising children? You know what I mean? And people have this mentality of something that doesn't exist. Listen, God tells us what a virtuous woman looks like, and it's her heart that's described. It's her works that are described. Right. It's her works. Everybody's going to get old and lose your hair. Your hair's going to go gray. Your body's going to, change over time, and that's okay, because love is in the heart anyway. And you ought to love from the heart and love the personality of a virtuous woman. You ought to love purity in your wife. That's right. I've heard single losers say all sorts of crazy things that they're looking for. And you know what? You're looking for something that doesn't exist, and you'll never find it. And the problem is, most of them aren't doing the due diligence of doing the work themselves. They're not reading the Bible like they ought to. They're not working hard as they ought to. They're just sitting around waiting for God to drop something perfect in their lap, and it doesn't exist. Look at verse number 28. So ought men to love their wives as their own bodies. He that loveth his wife loveth himself. That's a commandment to men. And you know, I love how God's balance is found all throughout the scriptures. We don't mistreat women. We don't mistreat children. God has perfect balance. And He wants the men to be responsible men and to do the right thing and to love their children and to love your wife as he ought to. Verse 29, for no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. In other words, here's the problem. In the flesh, we love ourselves, sometimes too much. And he says, look, it's natural. It comes natural for you to love yourself and be selfish. And that's the type of love we should have for somebody else. That doesn't come natural. We have to work at it to make sure that we're loving our wife more than our own self, more than our own fleshly desire. We need to love our wife just like Christ loved the church. He laid His life down for it. He's given us gifts. He's provided for everything that we need. Look at verse 29. For no man ever yet hated his own flesh, but nourisheth and cherisheth it, even as the Lord the church. For we are members of His body, of His flesh and of His bones. For this cause shall a man leave his father and mother, and shall be joined unto his wife, and they two shall be one flesh. God says, for this cause, how do you love each other? Well, number one, you must leave and cleave. This is absolutely necessary. Anybody that says, well, we'll move in mom and dad's house, whether it's the daughter, the girl, the boy, it doesn't matter. It won't work. It's not right. It's not right. No mother-in-laws. I've seen young ladies that were available on the market, but it was like mom was right there in tow, and it was kind of expected. Well, it's a package deal. You marry her, you get mom, right? Mom's going to be right there on you the whole time. And I think some single guys probably say, you know what? I don't want mother-in-law. Maybe the young lady, but not mom, right? Why? Leave and cleave so that the two can become one flesh. It should not be that a daughter and her mom are so isolated or so together that a husband couldn't join to the daughter. These things are so necessary in life, and there's nothing wrong with living near family or things like that, and at certain times or situations, maybe you have to move back in or move in a garage, and I don't think any of that's sin, but I think it's very clear and very important that the two learn to depend on each other and each other alone. And if you expect a man to marry a woman and must take mom, man, there's a big problem there. Big problem. In the same way, I do not believe that a man should expect his bride to be subject to his mother. That man, yes, should respect his parents, but must respect his wife and love his wife above mom. Leave and cleave so the two can grow together. That's God's perfect will. Look at verse 33. Nevertheless, let every one of you in particular so love his wife, even as himself. And listen, and see the wife that she reverence her husband. What's a virtuous woman? Well, she loves God first. She fears the Lord. And then she's going to reverence her husband second. She's going to take care of her family. Go to Proverbs chapter 31. Go ahead and go back. So God is first. Her family comes second. And like I said, listen, the children can never come before the spouse. The spouses work together as a team. Marriage is two becoming one, raising as many as the Lord will give. Proverbs chapter 31. I want you to look at verse 21. She is not afraid of the snow for her household. All her household are clothed with scarlet. Now this is interesting. It says that she fears God, and we know that comes first. So then here, using a description of clothing, we can see the order of her priorities. Well, when it comes to clothes, she's going to make sure her household is taken care of first. She's going to make sure dad has a clean pair of work pants before he leaves for the day. She's going to make sure her children have, the diapers they need, the clothes that they need, right? It says all her household are clothed with scarlet. She takes care of their needs. That is her job, and she learns to love it. That's kind of hard sometimes. Any job, unless you got the dream job, but most jobs kind of take some liking. Even the dream job, you get bored with it. So you have to kind of, Lord, help me to love my job. Lord, help me to serve where I'm supposed to. Help me to be faithful in all things. And, if it's difficult, man or woman, ask the Lord to help you to love your job, because your job is already described by God. He tells you what we need to do. And so to accomplish that, you need to learn to love your job. I told my daughter that it is her job to obey mom, period. That is her job to obey mom and dad. That's her job right now. That is her responsibility on this earth. And if she breaks that, if she messes up, well, she's not doing her job. So you get in trouble, right? Just as much as if the man doesn't provide and says, well, maybe we'll go live under the bridge next month. Well, you're not doing your job, buddy, right? Well, if the wife isn't reverencing her husband or making sure her household are clothed, she's not doing her job. I find it interesting that we can see these priorities right here just in talking about clothing. It talks about food and everything else, but especially when this is written, it took a whole lot of extra work to get some clothes. You couldn't just go down to the dollar store and get some paper thin t-shirt for $1. You actually had to make things and put it together or gather resources and create what was necessary to make sure that somebody was taken care of. So she loves her job. But look at the next verse. This is interesting. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Notice she put her family first. She put her household clothes first, and then the next verse is herself. Now this is very important because a woman should not omit taking care of herself, right? First, she's not selfish, she takes care of her family, but then she takes care of her clothes too. And it is very important for every individual. And again, we're not talking about push-ups. I'm not saying, well, mom, you had a baby, you better start going push-ups and go to the gym. No, forget about that nonsense. Worry about the baby. Worry about taking care of your family. Worry about the things that God has lined out. Right? So we're talking about take care of your health. Make sure you're eating well. Make sure that you have good mental health. Make sure, take a bath if that's a problem. Make sure you're reading the Bible. Ladies need to read the Bible. They need that spiritual support. They need men to provide, to help with all of these things. That's the men's job. But, in 1 Timothy 4, he says, take heed unto thyself and unto the doctrine, continue in them. Take heed to thyself. There comes a time and a place where you need to tell somebody else no, so you can take care of yourself, right? And I think this is very important. She clothes herself well. She makes of herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. And again, we're not talking about she's just making sure that she takes care of herself as well. You must put yourself in your order of priorities. God first. Ladies, your husband second, your children third, and then take care of yourself as well. And the men, it's the same order. Men, God first. Your wife is second. She is the most important person in your life. Then come your children. Then come yourself. This is biblical order, and it's perfect. Look at verse 24. She maketh fine linen and selleth it, and delivereth girdles unto the merchant. Well, there's others. They're last, right? Now, I think this also includes the friends, the poor and the needy, anything business related. All that comes last. You don't let the neighbor needing a cup of sugar come in between you and your children or you and your husband, right? And I don't think that this verse justifies a mom ignoring their children to make some name for themselves online to have some business. I've seen a lot of pastors where it's kind of like, well, the pastor has a name online, so maybe the pastor's wife should start making something and selling it. And I don't think that's right. And they use this verse to justify it, and I think that's priorities that are out of balance. I do not think that's what this verse is saying, right? She gathers enough, she has enough. The verse prior said she can help the poor and the needy. She has extra, she can sell something to the merchants. That's okay, that's good. But that was more this culture than it is this. Today, I don't think that a mom needs an eBay store or an Amazon store. I don't think that's right. And I've seen ladies where they show all their cooking and stuff online and, it looks like everything's well, but, if that YouTube channel or this online business gets in the way of your family, you're out of order. It is not righteous before God. The local family comes first, just like the local church must come before anybody else out there in the world. This local church is more important than the people that we go soul winning to. Teaching the gospel, teaching the doctrines of God in here is more important than soul winning. Right? If you don't know how to go soul winning if you're not being taught, that's why you have a bunch of dead Baptist churches that never go soul winning because they're not being taught how inside the church. Right? So the family must come first before others out in the world. And again, we're priorities. God, family, husband, children, others. And notice there's no room for TV here. There's no room for the soap operas, right? But what's the world's model? Yourself first. Self-help. Selfishness. Do what thou wilt, right? That's the law. Do whatever you want. So what does that mean? Well, my husband's gone. Send off the kids to some school where they're going to teach them a bunch of wicked doctrine, and let me turn on the TV and just tingle my brain and fall asleep and learn a bunch of wicked doctrine myself. This world's messed up because of the TV. And thank God that we have some women that have the right priorities. They want to put God first and their family next, and they're willing to take a back seat to the family. They're willing to be number 3. They're willing to make sure God is first, and there's no room for TV in that model. And to get there, to be a virtuous woman, or for us to be faithful men, we must make a decision now of what's most important. If you make a decision, you think about how Daniel purposed in his heart that he would not defile himself with the king's meat, right? As fathers, as men, we must purpose in our heart that having a virtuous woman and having a family and having children is more important than the riches of the world, than the lust of the flesh, the lust of the eyes, the pride of life. This is the priority. I'm going to purpose in that. Same thing for mom. Mom, you must decide raising these children up myself is more important than watching TV, having some job, right? Or just leaving my family, or jumping, whatever. You know what happens in the world. We don't have to expound it, but it makes me think about David. I think David, even though he had a heart after the Lord, but he didn't have his priorities right. He didn't love the first wife that he had. He ended up taking a second wife and then a third wife. And next thing you know, he's like, well, there's Bathsheba. Now, if his priorities were right, when he looked, he said, no, I've got a wife, and that ain't my wife. In fact, when he found out, whoa, that's somebody else's wife, I need to make God's law more important of a priority. Purpose in your heart now, and it sure does make it a whole lot easier whenever temptation comes across your path. Whenever you're having doubt or a down day, or you're wondering, is this really, do I want to have a family? Oh, do I have to raise all these kids? Purpose in your heart now what your purpose is, what your job is, and accept it and learn to love it. And it sure does make it a lot easier. Amen. The virtuous mom teaches her children what type of spouse will please God and make life better. Go back to verse number 1 here. The words of King Lemuel, the prophecy that his mother taught him, right? Again, mom saying, look for a virtuous woman, that would probably indicate mom was a virtuous woman herself. And she says, you know what? We have the warnings of all the other types of women. Don't you dare go near one of those. Make sure you find the right one. In fact, verse 3, give not thy strength unto women, nor thy ways to that which destroyeth kings. Again, a mom saying, listen, son, some women will destroy you. Avoid them. In fact, verse 10, let's look for the virtuous woman. Verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman? For her price is far above rubies. Priceless. Priceless. And her value can be measured or determined by her praise, by how she is praised. And it's just like an employee in business. Well, how do you know who the best employee at a job is? Well, it's the one that keeps getting the raises. It's the one that the boss says in front of the whole company, and guess what? His numbers are the best again, guys. You need to catch up with him, right? Well, that's how you know in a business in a room full of 30 men. I've seen things like that, and it's like, well, he's taking it serious. The boss is praising him. He's doing it right. Well, as husbands, it's our job to love our wife. It's our job to cheer up our wife. Yea, it's our job to praise our wife, to tell her she's doing a good job. That's as a steward of God, this is what we're commanded to do. Look at verse 11. The heart of her husband doth safely trust in her, so that he shall have no need of spoil. She will do him good and not evil all the days of her life. What is her heart? To do him good. And what's the result from him? He trusts her. He trusts her. It's like having money in the bank that you know is secure. That's what it feels like when you have a wife that you know you can trust. So the wife must be praised. She's worth investing everything into. Look at verse 25. Strength and honor are her clothing, and she shall rejoice in time to come. Ladies, when you're frustrated with a lot of kids, just think, well, in time to come, I'll be rejoicing, right? Strength and honor now, and in time to come, maybe when you get to be a gray hair, you'll say, wow, thank God I trained them right. It was hard, but it was worth it. They listened, they've applied it, and now they're raising the next generation. Look at verse 28. Her children arise up and call her blessed, and her husband also, and he praiseth her. How can we determine the value of a woman? By how she gets praised. Again, in a woman's not an employee, she's so much better. But you think about just a job site. The guy that makes the most is probably working the hardest. The guy that the boss brags on for staying late, for doing the hard work that nobody else would, the guy that he knows he can count on, well, the new guy's having a problem, don't worry, I know who to send. He'll take care of business. He'll instruct in the right way. He'll make sure everything is done properly, right? I mean, that's just job site, common knowledge. Well, guess what? Apply that to the house. Mom, are you being praised by your children, by your husband? Because you ought to be. Men, children, we are commanded to praise mom. Children, you are commanded to bless your mom. It's our job to bless our mother. In fact, I think we read about that last week, about the generation that curseth their mother and father instead of blessing them. Children, don't be that generation that says, oh, mom's after me again to clean my room. No, be the one that says, you know what, mom? Thank you for having me read the Bible. Thank you for spending the time to make food for me. Thank you for dragging us to church even when I don't want to go because I know I need it. Yeah. Right? Children, you need to praise your mom. That's your job. You're commanded to do that in the Bible. You need to bless your mother. And the husband also calls her blessed. Her husband also, it says in verse 29, and he praiseth her. Men, we need to remember this. This is. I don't think it comes naturally, and that's why God commands it. Sometimes we take things for granted instead of singing her praises and cheering her up as we ought to. Verse 29, look at what he says to his wife. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. He's saying, you know what? There's a lot of good Christian women in this world, but you're the best. Thank God I got the best wife. I know it for a fact. I got the best wife. Brother Jake would argue with me, but Jake, you're wrong. I got the best wife, right? And that ought to be our attitude. That ought to be our attitude. Thank God he gave me the wife that I need. She's perfect for me. She takes care of everything. God knew what he was doing when he brought us together. Thank God that I have the best wife. That ought to be our attitude. Thou excellest them all. He's saying it and he means it. That comes from the heart. That comes from the heart. Look what in Proverbs 19 he says, house and riches are the inheritance of fathers, but a prudent wife is from the Lord. Man, you ever just leave for work and you're just smiling? Man, she's doing such a good job with those kids. Man, it sure is. She packed me a lunch or whatever it is. Whatever just reminds you of your wife throughout the day, you need to say, a prudent wife is from the Lord. God, thank you for giving me a wife that's perfect. And then when you're spending time with her, don't forget to praise her and pray that God would help you to please her and to cheer her up and encourage her. That's our job. No one else is going to do it. Now, as we look at the fruit that comes from the heart of a virtuous woman, I want you to see this in verse 13. Look, it says, she seeketh. And I'm going to stop there for a second. Seeketh. Now, we love the King James Bible. It's perfect. It's preserved. Nothing is missing. And I want you to consider the next few words that end in the ETH. Seeketh. This is like an action word. It's a description of what she does, of what she cares about. This is evidence of where her heart is at and what her priorities are. This is evidence of her perspective. Look at verse 13. She seeketh wool and flax, and worketh willingly with her hands. She's seeking. She's working. That's hard work. She's making an effort to do it. Look at verse 14. She is like the merchant's ships. She bringeth her food from afar, right? You think, when I see this written to a man, now a man understands business better than he does family sometimes, right? And he says, listen, husband, your wife, it's like, how that ship, you just show up at the port and the ship is there. You don't really consider how the ship got there or what the ship had to go through. But when you have some good cargo, you appreciate it. You're thankful for that merchant. Well, your wife, you show up and boom, there's dinner and it's what I like and it looks great and the kids are happy. We're having time. Man, great. Consider what the voyage that ship had to take for that dinner to get there. Yes. Consider the labor your wife had to go through to get your clothes ready, to get the house clean. It's funny, the other night, it's just so easy. I was joking about it when we were in the other church building because it would just get messed up all the time, And I made a joke about a restaurant to kind of make an application. I spoke a proverb, if you will, to help others understand what is necessary to get the church clean again. I said, well, I go to the restaurant and I sit down and the table's clean and we make a mess and plates everywhere and we leave And miraculously, when we come back, it's all clean again. The restaurant has a clean table again. You know, most men look at it that way. They don't consider the voyage that the ship took, right? They don't consider the work that your wife went through. The other night, it was after midnight, and I was in the living room reading, and I look over in the kitchen, and there's crumbs on the floor where the kids are at. And I thought, there's crumbs on the floor. I never noticed it before. Why? Well, because even before I went to bed, after my wife got the kids up, she's up cleaning the floor again. Oh, you're cleaning the floor after midnight? Why does that matter? Well, she thinks about things that I don't, you know. And when you come home and it's like, hey, you know, the kids are happy. There's food on the table. Don't look at the crumbs. Mom will take care of it in time. She'll be praised in time, right? But, you know, it takes effort for things to happen, and you can find the littlest things to praise your wife for. We ought to. Preparing food is hard work. It takes thought. It takes planning. What's for dinner? I don't know. I guess we should go down to the store and get something now. What? It's dinner time. We can't go to the store now, right? So mom takes a lot of planning. She seeketh, she worketh, she bringeth. Look at verse 15. She riseth also while it is yet night, and giveth meat to her household, and a portion to her maidens. She's going out of her way to take care of business. Verse 16. She considereth a field, and buyeth it, and the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. She's active. She's always doing. She's not idle. She's not just sitting around watching TV, you know. And obviously back then things were a lot more difficult. She had to consider the field first, and then buy it, and then plant it, and then she has food, and then she gets up early in the morning to harvest it and prepare it and go out and slay that goat so you can have some steak and eggs for breakfast, right? You know, we're so thankful. I mean, life is a lot easier today with, you know, the modernization of the food processing, but still we need to be thankful for what a mom goes through. Yeah. We need to consider what she does, because it is a harder job than men have. I really believe that. Look what else it says in verse 17. She girdeth her loins with strength, and strengtheneth her arms. She puts on her belt, a gun belt, mama, maybe. No, she gets ready. She gets up, she gets ready. She strengtheneth her arms. Now, when it says strengtheneth her arms, this is not a mom doing push-ups so she can look good and take a selfie and put it on the internet for everyone else to look at. This is a woman that's picking up children and picking up buckets and moving things around and stacking food and doing whatever and moving a vacuum cleaner or whatever it is. She comes by her strength naturally. You know, it's kind of like the guy that sits in his mama's basement and pumps iron, and then he walks up to the guy that works for a living, and he can still smack him around even though he's not as big. Right? It's strength. Strength is acquired from doing things, not just from push-ups. Yeah. Look at verse 19. It says, verse 18. She perceiveth, again, she's looking, she's considering, she's planning. What is her perception? She perceiveth that her merchandise is good. Her candle goeth not out by night. The lights don't go out because she made a plan. Her priorities are to take care of her family. Therefore, she must perceive if she's hitting her goals. She has to look and say, she has to look into the future and say, I need a goal to be here. And then she has to work toward that goal. And that goal really is the children's heart, is to raise those children to love God. And listen, a messy house, a late dinner, those things are easily forgiven, especially when a mom is laboring in teaching children. That is the priority. That comes first. And men, we have to realize that sometimes those children, getting them through the day is more important. Look at verse 19. She layeth her hands to the spindle, and her hands hold the distaff. She layeth, right? Look at verse 20. She stretcheth out her hand to the poor. Yea, she reacheth forth her hands to the needy. Now I love this because she is prepared enough that she has something to share with others. Again, what kind of heart? That she would stretch. Well, that takes effort. That takes effort to consider others. That takes effort to make sure you have enough for yourself and then some extra so you can share with others. And I'm thankful for the ladies in our church. We have food every time we meet. There's people bringing food and sharing with others. Thank God for that. Praise the ladies that do that. There's a lot of work. There was a lot of planning to go. They consider it. They perceive it. They're giving meat to their household and to the poor and needy. Maybe the family that couldn't bring some, or whoever, doesn't have the time or ability to cook for themselves. They're always considering everyone else. That's awesome. That is the heart of a virtuous woman. Thank God for our church and the time we get together eating food, breaking bread together. Look at verse 21. She is not afraid of the snow for her household, for all her household are clothed with scarlet. Now, she's not afraid. This is also very important, ladies, that you shouldn't fret. If God's going to provide everything you need, and God's provided you a husband, and He's going to provide all your needs, and you have why are you afraid of anything? Oh no, and it's usually either, well, what if I can't feed my family? If I can't raise my children? What if I don't have enough children? What if I have too many children? What if we... Stop with the what if. Stop with the fears. She is not afraid. Why? Well, she makes a plan, she makes a priority, she makes sure it's righteous before the Lord, then she commits it to the Lord. She trusts in Him to provide. And I think it is more natural for a lady to be afraid of certain things because God says, hey, you need a husband. And it's the husband's job to say, it's okay, don't worry. I'll go out in the dark, you stay inside, don't worry about it. I'll take a stick or a gun if there's an animal, you don't worry about it, right? That's why God gives us balance in the marriage. But ladies, it's also important to remember that if God's provided, don't be afraid. Don't be afraid. Because fear, if you're fearing something other than God, it is sin. Look at verse 22. She maketh herself coverings of tapestry. Her clothing is silk and purple. Verse 23. Her husband is known in the gates when he sitteth among the elders of the land. I find this very interesting that the reputation of the woman is showing in the man. The man is known by his woman a lot of times. Yep. You think about that. God, I think He does a good job of bringing people together. His reputation or her reputation, one can affect the other. If a lady marries a fool, that poor lady, I can't believe her husband does all that stuff, right? If a man marries a contentious woman, it's known. And men talk about it. Oh man, I'm glad I'm not married to her. Oh, I can't believe he ended up with her. Oh, he married the odious woman. Whoa! Wonder how long that'll last. Right? It ought not to be that way. We should complement each other. Our reputation should be that of loving each other and taking care of each other. And when that's in balance, then the husband will be known in the gates. When he sitteth among the elders of the land, they'll consider, wow, your wife made that fabric that my wife bought and made me a shirt or whatever. Oh, your wife made that, what was it we had? Some potato casserole. What do you think about? I mean, the reputation, they overlap. Why? Because we're one flesh. The husband's known because of what the wife did, and vice versa. Look at verse 26. She openeth her mouth with wisdom, and in her tongue is the law of kindness. Again, how do we know the heart of the virtuous woman? It's what comes out of her mouth. When she opens up her mouth, is it just total folly? Is it foolishness or is it wisdom? In her tongue is the law of kindness. She obeys God's law. She knows God's law. She shares God's law. She teaches God's law. Instead of being a gossip, instead of murmuring, what ought a woman ought to know? That's not right according to the Bible. We shouldn't be talking about that person like that. We should be praying for them. Shouldn't we just pray for them? Right? I mean, that ought to be the response. Look at verse 27. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. She openeth, right? She looketh, she eateth. These are the things she's doing. She's making plans. She has a priority. She knows where she wants to go in life, and she's following through. I want you to go to Proverbs chapter 3. Flip back to Proverbs chapter 3. Go to the end of the chapter. Look at verse 33. The curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked, but He blesseth the habitation of the just. Now, do you want your house to be blessed or cursed? It's right here. The curse of the Lord is in the house of the wicked, but He blesseth the habitation of the just. Go to Proverbs 14. Proverbs chapter 14. Look at verse number 1. Every wise woman buildeth her house, but the foolish plucketh it down with her hands. How do we find a virtuous woman? One that wants to build up her house, build up her children. And this isn't saying she wants to build a mansion on the golf course. No, this is talking about building up her household, taking care of the people that God gives her, being a good steward over the souls that she's given. Look at verse 11 in the same chapter. The house of the wicked shall be overthrown, but the tabernacle of the upright shall flourish. Go to Proverbs 24. Proverbs chapter 24. Look at verse number 3. Proverbs 24, verse 3. Through wisdom is an house builded, and by understanding it is established. Now go back to Proverbs 31. Through wisdom is an house builded, and by understanding is it established. We're talking about the virtuous woman, a woman that says purity is important. Righteousness is important. God's wisdom is important. The fear of the Lord must come first in my life. That's a virtuous woman. And she builds her house instead of plucking it down. There's no curse on her house. God's blessing is on her house. Through wisdom is an house builded, and by understanding it is established. Now look at verse 27. She looketh well to the ways of her house, and eateth not the bread of idleness. The bread of idleness is sitting around on Facebook all day, watching TV, talking on the phone, gossiping, instead of worrying about the souls that God's given you. Again, food is important, clothing is important, and it deals with that. But the people in your lives are the most important thing. The time that you get to invest with other people, especially in your family, is priceless. You'll never get it back. Be thankful for what little bit of time you get in this life. She looketh well to the ways of her household, and eateth not the bread of idleness. That's a virtuous woman. Look at verse 28. We're almost done. Her children arise up and call her blessed. Her husband also, and he praiseth her. Many daughters have done virtuously, but thou excellest them all. That ought to be the goal, is to say, well, I know what a virtuous woman is, and not only do I want to be one, but I want to excel in that. I want to excel in that. I want it to be said, excellence in wisdom and fear of the Lord. Look at verse 30. Why? Look at this, is so important. Verse 30 is huge. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. True beauty in a woman is one that fears God, that wants to do the right thing before God. Favor is deceitful. Do you understand? It's deceitful when the world judges somebody and they pick a favorite. When the world picks a favorite, oh, well, she won the beauty contest. Yeah, but she's dumber than a box of rocks. And she can't be trusted for anything. You can't trust her around anybody. Like, that's not a virtuous woman. That's not the type of person that we should favor. Favor is deceitful because the world always picks the worst. They pick the people with the dark hearts that will do whatever it takes to become popular and be famous. And you name any celebrity and you look in their past and what have they done? Something wicked, something evil, something despicable to defile themselves, and that's how they got popular. Well, that's not the type of favor we ought to have. So when the world, well, that's my favorite, or I listen to that artist, or I watch this actress, forget them. It's deceitful. It's not a just balance. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. If all you're worried about is, oh, I got to look good, I got to do these push-ups, I got to put on a pound of makeup, well, that's not who you are. What you are inside matters the most. And men, when your wife doesn't have any makeup on, when her hair looks crazy, when she wakes up and she doesn't feel good about herself, you need to let her know she's a beautiful woman. You let her know that she has the values that are priceless. That's what matters. That's right. Favor is deceitful, and beauty is vain. And you can remind a woman about that. You know, take no thought for your life. Don't know what you will put on and wear. Don't worry about that stuff, what you're going to wear. Oh no, does this match? Hey, it all looks good, you know. Doesn't matter. That's right. Favor is deceitful and beauty is vain, but a woman that feareth the Lord, she shall be praised. Why? Because we're commanded to praise her. Now this is talking about God will praise her, God will lift her up, but men, children, it's our job to let mom know that she's doing a good job. That's our responsibility. God's commanding us to bless our mother. Yep. Look at verse 31. Again, He's commanding us, give her of the fruit of her hands, and let her own works praise her in the gates. It says that she worketh willingly with her hands. Let the works of her hands praise her. It will. When somebody says, wow, that food was amazing. Oh, you're the one that made that crafty little thing. Whatever. I mean, you know how ladies are. And they do it more than men. But men, it's your job to praise your wife. Praise her works. What did it say in verse 16? She considereth the field and buyeth it, and with the fruit of her hands she planteth a vineyard. Moms, ladies, that's the job, is to consider the fruit of your hands. What's the fruit of your hands? Is it working a remote, working a phone, talking to people, or is it raising children, investing your time into other people? That's true virtue. And God will praise a virtuous woman. Again, verse 10, who can find a virtuous woman? Her price is far above rubies. Men, if you've got one, you know it. And it's priceless. It's better than the bank. It's better than credit. It's better than the house. Having that wife. You could live under the bridge and say, well, thank God I got my wife. Yeah. And that's what we're looking for. Young men and young ladies, this is the goal. This is the goal. Become a virtuous woman. Look, young men, find a virtuous woman. Let's pray. Dear Heavenly Father, thank you for your word. Lord, thank you for